Hello, Community Meta Podcast, Episode 3 has arrived on your audio-visual presentation device. I'm Mighty, and I'm joined with Morg for the Game On Aus crew. And today we are going to be talking about the sort of concepts between dedicated servers versus having matchmaking style servers. So those are your quick plays and your peer-to-peer sort of stuff. So I think that's kind of the very brief overview. So Morg, what was your favorite server to play on back in the day?
Back in the day?
Back in the day. Any game, any server, lay it out.
I would say my all-time favorite server was on Zombie Panic Source.
Mhm.
And the reason was just because of the community there, which, hands down, we're a community podcast. Of course,
Yep.
it's going to be the reason that it was my favorite server. Every time I think back to that server, I just have a fond memory of the owner, who was called Oxide.
Mhm.
And every time he was about to die, he would scream out over chat, "Come taste some oxygen, bitch!" and then pulled a grenade as it was swarmed by zombies. So as he's dying, he just explodes into a
Oh,
And
I love it.
every time I think of that server, that was the sort of things that went on, and sort of the community that was fostered, just people doing tons of stuff like that.
Yeah. Did
And that
it
was like
run any mods, or was it like a base game server?
so Zombie Panic Source, you would just download maps
Okay.
and it would run off maps. So that was just that was community hosted. Instead of it wasn't a dedicated server run by the developers. So they really just you were able to put as many different rules as you wanted, and I'm sure we'll go into a little bit more technical knowledge between the differences between dedicated and community later on. But if you just want to go into your favorite server now.
Oh, mine. I really spent a lot of time on the. So there was a couple of I played a lot of Natural Selection too back in the day, and there was a group of Australian servers that were hosted in. It's a university in Melbourne, and I can't think of the name right now, but I would recognize it if you said it to me.
RMIT?
No, it wasn't RMIT. It was. Mum studied at it. I'm sure
Some
I'll wake up.
university.
Yeah, I'll wake up screaming its name out at night. So, and so there was a group of 3 servers actually that were hosted there, and similar to yourself, one of the things that was nice about those kind of servers was you did start to see the regulars, and it was nice to sort of you actually made kind of friends, or you'd see the same people over and over again. But I think it was nice in the sense of a lot of those dedicated servers, both back in the day and still to this day on the games that do have them. I think they certainly bring an element of kind of like love and care for the games from the communities that make them, if that makes sense. So if these days, I think a lot of them are like the larger scale games, such as like your Squad, Armor, Hell Let Loose, those sort of types. So anything I think that's got a sort of like a community that gets together and says, "Hey, we want to play video game." It's great in that sense, but it's also good because it allows groups to sort of customize their experience to fit themselves, if that makes sense, even if it's just by curating it with a whitelist and making sure that the right people play with the right people, or getting the mods right as well. That I think we talked about it briefly last week, where some servers in Armor were like quote unquote competing with each other for players, and they'd add mods to try to get more players and things like that, and so you end up with the cream rising to the top, and then that's how you ended up with things like battle royale mod games and things like that, or a lot of the survival games like JZ. It's just because, and that's all stemmed from groups of people getting together on these servers and customizing their experience, and I think that's pretty darn awesome. Is sort of how I feel about it. So, but about the time, I'm trying to think of when about dedicated servers started to sort of drift away. And I think it was Modern Warfare 2. I remember there being some concerns when Modern Warfare 2 came out regarding either that they didn't have dedicated servers, but they were exclusively peer-to-peer or something along those lines. Because you mentioned there, Morg, about like the difference between the devs sort of stumping up to have a server up that just people can go, versus, you know, like you or I being like, yeah, I like Minecraft. I'm gonna make a Minecraft server.
So I think I would distinguish the differences between dedicated hosting and community hosting with if you launch a game and you click say find a match and it only gives you the servers which are hosted through that specific company that run the game. They're all pretty generic. They don't really have any rules attached to them. Um, they
Beyond
just,
like the base rules of
yeah,
the game.
yep, exactly.
Okay, cool.
Um, so there's not really any rules and there's not any modifications. It's just you're playing the raw game how the developers intended. Whereas community
Mm.
hosting, whilst just still may have community hosted games where it's just the raw game, the majority of them are going to have rules, and maybe some modifications which are going to tailor the player
Mm.
experience slash the community to however the owner wants it, and that owner
Mm.
is not affiliated generally with the publisher.
Mm.
They're doing it from their own back pocket per se.
And I think in some cases those house rules can also feed as a kind of they can also become a kind of player feedback for the developers of the games as well. So, for example, in Hell Let Loose and other games similar to it, such as Squad, you have a lot of the servers will have server rules regarding what they consider to be spawn camping. So each map, you start on a specific side of the map. And for gameplay reasons, you need to be able to enter your enemy's HQ sectors. In Hell Let Loose specifically, it's usually because there's an artillery cannon there that everyone has, and artillery is not fun to be on the receiving end of. So you actually need to sort of infiltrate in to get it. It's also where tanks spawn, and so what those sort of communities would consider to be spawn camping is things like killing a tank before the crew has had a chance to get into it, or camping the artillery so that like if someone's on the artillery, you sneak into it and you kill them while they're on the artillery, that's fine. But if you're standing there and they come back to get on the artillery, you might kill them before they get on the artillery. It's a bit of a gray area. Some servers think that that's camping. Some servers are like, well, what's the difference? You're just going to kill him when he's on the gun anyway. So what can happen is then when a lot of the servers have got house rules like that, it also serves as a kind of feedback for the devs, and they might go, hey, everybody's like doing this, which is slightly a kludge around something that we've got in the game. Should we maybe look at changing the mechanics in some fashion so that it's less of a kludge and people don't need to have house rules? Because whenever servers operate with house rules, you always have to have the arguments sort of thing with people one way or another. So that's sort of one of those interesting sort of parts that dedicated servers go. Whereas if you just have matchmaking and on-demand servers, you got nothing. You know, like if there's a gameplay issue, you can't solve it. You just have to play the game as it lies, for all its faults as well in some cases. And some games can feel more pronounced than others in that one.
But
So yeah.
it's not to mean with like matchmaking where you get that sort of lack of community. Like
Mm.
I know that in the topper end of say rank queuing for Counter Strike, if you're queuing at the high, like if you're the highest level and you're queuing there, you're going to see irregulars coming through just
Mm.
in your random matchmaking queues all
Mm.
the time, and that's generally how people get picked up for like esports teams
Mm.
and things like that because people are like, hey, this guy's really cracked. I keep running into him and he keeps beating me.
Mm.
I want him on my team. Let's reach out and see how it goes.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the weirder things that comes with a lot of the matchmaking points is that when you have a matchmaking system, you have queue times. So if I have a if I'm looking for a game like a dedicated server in a game, fire up the game, fire up the server list, and I can go, okay, here's a server I want to play on. It's got players, it's got the rules that I like. I will connect to this server and I'll play. Sometimes, though, depending on your time of day, who's online, that sort of stuff, that process can take longer. And I think that the way that a lot of the more matchmaking style stuff came out was because people generally sometimes found that to be more busy work, which wasn't necessarily like fun, so they basically just like, oh, hit a play button. Like, you don't care who you play with, you don't care about managing that sort of part of your experience. You just want to press W and left click on heads, and so you press play and then you just go into a queue. And that's like, I feel that that's it takes away your ability to curate your experience the way you want it to be. If that sort of thing, like, I will quite often, you see people saying, I will happily wait longer queue times if I get better quality matches. And it also introduces this whole thing where matchmaking becomes the algorithm. And so, suddenly, I'm not playing, you're either getting matched against the wrong kind of people, or you are, you might think you're better than you are, or whatever the case is. It's another mysterious bugbear that no one's really responsible for, but it's their fault,
Yeah, it's a random factor.
Yeah, yeah, or at least it's not a factor that you feel like you have enough control over, and whereas if I just want to play on like a dedicated server, I might be able to say, hey, I really like this particular map. I'm going to play on this server that runs this map or is currently on this map. I can change servers later if I really want to. And I think it's kind of like, it's that sort of thing where it sort of feels a bit like over time, we talked about it a little bit, but it sort of feels like as a consumer, your ability to take ownership over your purchase has kind of diminished over the years, because a lot of the little extra, like, rougher knobs that you might use have kind of been taken away from you, on the basis that not enough people used them or cared about them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
So I guess with I guess the community based dedicated servers, if we're going to distinguish between
mm,
both kinds of dedicated servers,
mm,
you're generally just going to you're going to be able to tailor your own experience,
mm,
and be with sort of your people in the sort of community aspect through those community enforced rules,
mm.
which allow you to sort of choose the server where you're like, this is the funnest gameplay for me,
Yes.
and that's why I want to stick around.
Yeah.
But yeah, in match, like with matchmaking, even if it's rank based, whilst you're not gonna get the same sort of sense of community of seeing the normal people all the time, you're still gonna see the same people show up randomly in your queues because
Yeah.
um, generally you're going to be queuing at the same times because that's when you're free and they're free. So there's
Yeah.
a sort of higher probability. It gets a bit
Mm,
weirder for like battle royales because
mm,
the, I would say in a battle royale sense, because just how large scale the maps are like that, you're
mm.
not going to get the same sense of community compared to something like CS:GO, where there's only going to be 10 people in your game instead
Yeah.
of 100. So you can pick, like, oh, I've queued with this guy before. I know he's good, or I know he's
Yeah.
toxic.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's like that thing, like, if you have a bad game, do not rage requeue. You have to wait 10 minutes, otherwise you might get matched with the same people again. You know, and there was a there was a really interesting one a while ago where Overwatch had a avoid this player feature, right? They was supposed to be because like, avoid this player because they use naughty words and hurt my feels. But what people were often doing was they were getting like, they were using it to avoid being challenged. So one of the, I think he was a Widowmaker player. He was really good, cracked out of his mind. Suddenly, he has queue times that are measured in hours, and it's because people were playing against him and then going, avoid this player. And so suddenly, that's really, it's a really weird kind of decentralized bullying. That's a very extreme take on it, but like, like this guy can't find a match, and it's not because he's done anything other than play game good to the point where other people don't want to play with him, and it's
On,
the poor guy.
on the flip side, though, those people
Mm.
who were queuing probably didn't want to play against him because they were just getting massacred. So they
Yeah,
felt it
which
wasn't fun anymore, and they wanted to
yeah.
avoid him.
And then
Um,
that then brings up the question of if the matchmaking's ending, if the matchmaking is working like as intended or something like that, they shouldn't be getting wrecked by him. And so that's where the whole you start to feel not in control anymore, because it's not like I can just find another server, or I can just go somewhere where this player might not be, because the matchmaker's just going to kick him up. And I think weirdly, like with the matchmaking stuff as well, is it's you sort of press play and you wait. And some games, depending on how strict their matchmaking is, as well as your own rank within their system, can really affect your queue time. So as you start to climb those ranks, um, you become a statistical outlier to the point where, like a lot of Dota players, for example, like you just can't queue in Australia because if you get up to a certain level, because there's just not enough players at that rank on at the same time to give you a like what they'd consider like a balanced game. A lot of players have to play in the Southeast Asia region from Australia, because that's where there's enough saturation of players that your queue times aren't non-existent. But on the other hand, Dota also does have custom lobbies, but that also means that you have to make that effort to connect with a community to find those custom lobbies, and those can always be uh, it's because it's like an extra step. It's a little trickier, if that makes sense. Like the queue button's right there. I can just click and wait. It might take 20 minutes. I'll get a game, 40 minutes of my day done. Versus, you know, sometimes hours upon just talking to people and trying to find out hey, where are the good games at, mate? The good games. Like you meet a guy in a dark internet alley with a trench coat, just like, hey, buddy, you want some high quality ranked games?
I think that's a great segue of where we get the competitive communities popping up for these
Mm,
games, where essentially they just run a series of in-house pickup game
mm, mm,
matches. So then these outliers don't actually need to rely on matchmaking to
mm.
find games. They go to this external community, run through something like Discord or a web-based
Yeah, or
matchmaking
Counter
system like
Strike's got
Basic.
yeah, Face It as well. Like it's a different matchmaking pool.
Yeah.
Which
Which
is probably the best. Like, it's probably the best example of an automated system of that. Um,
Yeah, so you have these competitive communities that sort of pop up, where people are trying to play seriously and sort of get better.
mm,
So you generally find the better players sort of go towards those communities and just
yeah,
don't bother with matchmaking at all, just
mm,
because of the sort of unreliability of it to get good games.
yeah, and that's you sort of also get where people start to sort of think about like what's the phrase, like splitting the player base, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's usually used more so to do with like DLCs and stuff like that, like, oh, if you buy the DLC you can't play with people who have the base game or vice versa, or something along those lines. But I think it might apply as well to that sort of your competitive players are off somewhere else. But then again, I think if those players are going somewhere where they enjoy the game more, they would be there in the game. And if they don't enjoy, if that wasn't available to them, they would be playing a different game, um, sort of thing. So it's like it's a little bit like that with like a lot of games that have progression and challenges in um, like the matchmaking or the base games, but they'll disable progression for custom lobbies and things like that, which I think is I can understand why people do it, but I think that at the end of the day, someone playing your game is someone playing your game. Like it's you should have that ability to sort of exert a little bit more control over the quality of the experience that you have. Whereas sometimes it's like, oh no, you got to get on the treadmill so that you're looking at the cash shop or whatever the assorted motivations might be.
Your battle pass.
The battle pass stuff, like like it's one of those weird things. So maybe, well, it was about 9 years ago I started playing PlanetSide, and people started referring to farming in PlanetSide, and I was like, well, I don't understand how it's farming, because you have to work to do this. Like you do have to be engaged and trying to get that sort of success. It's not like World of Warcraft, where it was like, I'm going to right click on my screen once every 2 minutes, I'm going to put Star Wars on that monitor, and I'm just going to have the grind going off in the side. I'm not, I'm engaging with the game begrudgingly so that I can get to where I actually want to be. Whereas something like what I was describing with PlanetSide there is you have the gameplay. Like it's not you're not kind of like trying to just skip through everything to get to the actual good bit. It is the good bit, sort of thing. So slightly backpedaling with the community, with the competitive stuff. One of the more interesting things, I had a conversation with a guy a while ago, and he was cracked at video games like long before they started using dedicated servers and things like that. And the experience that he had was really interesting, because beforehand I was pretty regularly, I was like, man, like I really miss dedicated servers. Like you got to know people, you got to curate the experience, you usually had admins available and things like that, mods, all that sort of, all the good stuff that we like to talk about. And his experience was, as someone who was like very good at a video game, you get accusations. Now, in a game with matchmaking, you can be good at a game and just succeed, and that's generally safe. But in something like with a dedicated server, if you're too good, people start to they do start to question you, and quite often people who aren't as good a judge as to what is and isn't possible within the rules of a game. So all they see is they're losing to this person. They must be cheating, right? And so then you end up with people who are legit players getting false positived because of whatever reasons. You might have admins just wanting to be, the big fish in a small pond. You might have groups like vote kicks that happen just because people just think that someone's cheating when they're not. They're just good. And the people who are accusing them, they don't have that foundation of knowledge to be able to tell the difference, which is really unfortunate. So anyway, this guy had this experience where what would happen is he'd join a server, Counter-Strike server or whatever, play a couple of rounds, and he was doing good at video game. And then over the time, usually what happens is, if it's a very big stomp, half the server leaves because, that was a very big stomp, I'm out. And so what would happen was he would join a server, he'd get to play a couple of rounds, but over time the server would kind of drain. And if it was nearing the end of the night, it would sort of churn players. And then he would then have to go and find another server, which usually had the same players that he'd just been playing against on, but they've all just moved on, and so that was a really interesting kind of thing. And I thought, what, that is actually a decent sort of point in terms of the matchmaking side of things, is it does sort of remove that particular pain point from a community and things like that, because you do get sometimes admins of these sort of servers who might have it's a bit sorry?
An ego?
Yeah, more or less. Like it's disproportionate, right? So like they are doing a good thing. They're providing a server for the community, but in some cases it can almost be like Indian giving, right? They're like, I gave you this server, I can take it away. I'm taking my bat and ball and going home because I'm not as good at this video game, or whatever the or it might be arguments as to like how you treat people on the server, like, you know, where do you stand on the version of shit talk and stuff like that. At the end of the day, I do believe that servers that are deliberately curated will find a community that works for them, and it'll be various levels of rowdiness and various levels of skill, but the as we've sort of spoken a few times, the trick is finding your tribe, and that does take some conscious effort, which might not always be, like the time investment is sometimes hard to justify, especially if you've just got a couple of hours to kill and you just want to play a video game and click the mans,
A great example of this is Rust, where
Mm,
um, some servers will have it's just your standard Rust. When you're collecting resources, you're collecting it at the rate the developers intended. And then other servers, admins are turned on like 5 times resource collection. So when
mm,
you're hitting stuff like a tree or a rock, you're getting 5 times or 10 times the amount of resources as
mm.
the standard game, which is trying to cater to a community where they don't have all day to just farm rocks
Yeah,
for their base. They just want to come
yeah.
on, play some Rust, and yeah, not worry about selling their soul to the Rust
Yeah.
developers.
Yeah. And like it's the same sort of thing with that's almost like the difficulty argument, like even like if I'm playing on hard mode, it doesn't matter that someone else is playing on easy mode. It doesn't affect my experience.
Yeah,
Um
I would personally never play on a 5 times resource collection, even if it
mm,
saves me time, just because I feel
mm,
like I'm the type of person that feels sort of cheaty, um,
yeah.
and I understand that server's not for me, you know.
Yeah.
Um, it's for those people who probably have kids and can only spend,
Mm.
an hour a night or at the best possible
Yeah.
scenario, maybe 30 minutes
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
during the
Yeah.
week.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that it's good that that's one of the things that I think the dedicated servers do bring, is that you do get to engage a lot more with the content on your terms, a little bit more, if that makes sense, as opposed to you're at the whims of whatever the developers say. It's all in the algorithm, it's all in the matchmaking, and like, oh, there's just nothing we can do. And like people complain about teammates, they're random match made teammates constantly every game, no matter what title it is, no matter what genre it is. Like there's always that, I'm in elo hell, which I don't believe in, but and and you just sort of it's all kind of, it's like old man yells at cloud, it's like, what can I do to get around this? Whereas at least with a dedicated server, you can get in and you got a vague idea of what to expect, and you can sort of go, you know what, it's worth, in my opinion, it is worth the extra time to curate that, because if I spend half an hour to have an hour of great gameplay, that is better than waiting 5 minutes in queue for maybe 2 hours of meh gameplay, um but that's, everyone's got different levels of what counts as great gameplay versus what counts as meh. So um that's
Yeah, at
more
the
or
end of the
less
day, you're there to have fun, right?
exactly
Or
whatever
if you're
we
a
got to do
competitive
to get our
player,
dopamine.
if you're a competitive player, then you're there to get better
Yeah,
in aspect of the
but that
competitive
is but
communities.
that is the having fun,
I
like that is.
You got me there. I don't
Yeah.
actually think I've ever heard a competitive player called playing the game fun.
And well, that might be another topic we could talk about at some point, like, am I actually enjoying this? But yeah, like it can sometimes look like that, and but love and hate, they're both sides of the same coin, right? You got to really look out for indifference.
Yeah.
uh,
Sure. What's actually pretty, as you're talking earlier about people leaving dedicated servers, I was thinking you sort of get this weird phenomenon where at like a certain time a server's classified as dead, if we go back to
yeah,
last week. So everyone sort of goes to bed at the same time,
yeah, yeah.
just based on when the community decides that's enough games for tonight.
Yeah.
And then if
Well, it's a little bit like that's a little bit present in matchmaking as well, though. Like your queues get a bit longer. Like I think Overwatch in Australia now, you get long queues at night, and you very much you see the same people over and over again. And that was one of the weirder things with PlanetSide back in the day. Is like people would say, you know what, I can actually play this game in Australia late at night. There might only be 60 people online, which isn't really it's not like classic PlanetSide, but there's enough people to have gameplay interactions. Meanwhile, if you wanted to play back in the day like Battlefield or something along those lines, like all those servers were empty after midnight or 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. Jim's saying the same. Halo is the same. You get matched with cross-regional matching when your local player base is lower and you get insane ping. Whereas I think that quite often sometimes, even those sort of like low population times during servers, I think some of the Hell Let Loose servers in Australia, they refer to it as like seeding. Like there's like seeding rules for like when you're playing on the server while it's not there's like a cutoff for like the server admins have sat down and gone, oh, okay, we need X players to have like good game. And if we're lower than X players, try to play this way instead. I said Hell Let Loose, but I think it's more likely I've definitely seen it used with Squad. And that's where people just like clown around and make like a giant tower of sandbags or something along those lines while they're waiting for people to turn up to play. But like in that sort of sense, like so yeah, like the time zone and the player base online does matter, but I think both matchmaking and dedicated servers will suffer from it. It's just more visible with dedicated servers, whereas with matchmaking, it's invisible, but it's the same problem. And so like at the end of the day, you just see a long queue time, and that's kind of it. Whereas it's why sometimes I sort of feel like when games put like, oh, X million, X number of players online, when you queue up, like I don't really feel like that's
a great
it's not.
representation of your community. Like when I say community, like your
Exactly.
local people you're gonna
Yeah,
connect with.
yeah, like I'm gonna boot up Apex Legends at like 10 a.m. on a Saturday, and it says, oh, like it might say 40, 50 people. Well, Saturday's a poor example, but a weekday, it might say 40, 50 people online. You're like, that's not enough people to play video game. And it does call back a little bit to the dead games thing, but it's like a death spiral, like people stop turning up because they don't think that enough people are turning up. But if everybody turned up, it'd be fine. And that's basically just a problem with our fleshy human meat vessels needing things like sleep and food, as opposed to being able to video game 24/7. Am I right, fellow gamers?
Imagine.
Imagine not needing to sleep. Think of all the extra stuff we could get done.
I live on a digital diet of video games.
That's right. Yeah, I have to cook my food in Minecraft. So one of the other things it's not, I don't think it's straight related to everything that we were talking about so far tonight, but there is an example I've got of the times are changing back in the day. So World of Warcraft used to have exclusively insulated server communities. You joined a server, your character was stuck to that server, you interacted with other people on that server, your auction houses were on that server, all that sort of stuff. And that, like a lot of games, MMOs and things like that have that sort of thing, over time you have less players and some servers start to dry up in terms of people. They do that death spiral I was just talking about. It happened with PlanetSide as well. On release, there was a lot more servers.
New World.
But yeah, yeah, New World as well. They just merged a lot of servers together, so at least you can find other players now. But like it's definitely a bit of a fall. But at the end of the day, you need that sort of player density in an MMO to make it worth being there. So what happened with World of Warcraft, and this is something that I kind of think that Blizzard has in the past particularly been not so great about, was they introduced like the looking for group system and later they did looking for raid, which different people talk about, I'm sure. So the way that sort of system worked is they introduced like cross realm stuff. So instead of having your realm where everything was like instance in your realm, you had to look for groups in your, you had to look for dungeons in your realm, you had to look for battlegrounds in your realm. It was entirely limited to the players on your realm, and eventually you might not have enough players in your realm to start a battleground. You know, like that's those were like 40 versus 40, or uh, or your raids are like 40 people. You need to find 40 people on your faction to do a raid. Every guild had, every server had those. It was fine. And the same with dungeons. But they started to have issues where basically, like, at the end of the day, if you wanted to do a dungeon in older versions of WoW, like, you had to, I hope you're sitting down for this, you had to talk to other humans and
What?
say, hey, do you want to do a thing together? And they either said yes or no, and then you go, great, cool, I'll join your group. So you join your group. WoW back in the day didn't have as much like in-game transportation options. So, oh, I want to do this dungeon, great, and you need 5 people. One of them's got to have a key. Now I need to spend, if you're lucky, 15 to 20 minutes in trade chat going, oh, hey, we're looking for someone for this group. You need the key, and, you know, like, we need a tank and a healer. Cool, great. You know, it was a bold strategy back in the day to not be a tank or a healer if you wanted to do group content. But the process, you know, and that's like we were talking about before, it takes you a while to get the content that you actually want, but part of what makes it worth it was that process of seeking it and making it for yourself. So when WoW introduced cross-server realms, they first did it with battle groups. So instead of you know, just like the Spirestone server having Spirestone versus Spirestone stuff, they grouped a lot of servers. So about like 6 to 8 servers would all be like grouped into the same battle group. So you'd be matched with players from your battle group. So suddenly Spirestone players are getting mixed in with you know, Amon'Thul players or something like that. And so it was healthy in terms of the player base, and in terms of finding a match in time, you can get that really quick. But it also meant that whatever local metas had existed on the servers sort of vanished, basically. So they used to have a yeah, anyway, that's a long tangent. I won't go down that one in particular. But what I'm eventually going to get to the point is I sort of feel like Blizzard has been guilty of commodifying your multiplayer experience without connecting you with people. So suddenly when they had these battle groups, you could queue for like your battlegrounds, your dungeons and stuff like that. Okay, dungeon groups suddenly became I queue, I'm the tank. People stopped referring to each other with their names. It was like tank, stop being suck, or like DPS, you bad. Whereas previously you actually had to get to know people. You'd do a couple of runs with the same people, you'd add them to your friends list, and then you actually had like your own personal network where you could take on various dungeons. And, you know, good quality players were worth the time, basically. Whereas nowadays it's like, oh, I'm just going to queue into a dungeon. You know, you might get like out of 5 people, you might get one who's a little bit not so good at video game. But in WoW, that didn't really matter. You could generally sort of carry hard enough if you worked hard enough.
Yeah, that's a great example of sort of matchmaking being added to within sort of your
Yeah,
dedicated server realm in WoW, and taking
yeah,
away from the community aspect of it and just sort of
yeah.
making everyone faceless.
Yeah, exactly. Like suddenly it wasn't like, oh, I know this guy. He plays this class and he's good at it. It's just, oh, there's the hunter. This guy's a mage. Okay, well, you know, we'll find out if they're any good at what they do. And the trouble was, after it was over, because it was cross realm, you'd never see him again. You know, like I think they did eventually add, like you could party cross realm and you could make friends list cross realm and stuff like that. But there was a good 3 or 4 years there at least, where you were still stuck on your server for the most part, and the other players that would drift in and out of your dungeons were sort of like ghosts, you know,
Yeah, I think a
rude,
great
rude, racist ghosts.
I think a great way to sum it up is convenience doesn't always convenience usually is at the detriment of quality.
Exactly, and that's basically what I think. That's actually what the entire thing boils down to, really, isn't it? Like dedicated servers are convenient, but the quality is in. I think the dedicated servers are much more worth the quality. Like it's like it's at the end of the day, it's like Macca's versus Grilled, mate. Like.
Yeah, Macca's is quality, right?
Oh yeah, they've got a McCafe now, and they served a lettuce once. So yeah, uh, but I think that's sort of what most of it boils down
Yeah,
to. Is
dedicated.
it's at the end? It's like we say every week,
Yeah,
it's worth taking the time to find your tribe.
I think that's our new show slogan.
Yeah, find your tribe. Yeah.
I think that's an excellent way to sort of conclude it off there.
Yeah, I agree. So this has been the Community Meta podcast from Game On Aus. We will be back next time you hear us, because this is a sneaky pre-recorded one, and whenever this falls on your ears, I hope you have had a good time, and will continue to do so for as long as you can make it last. So thank you very much,
Thanks, guys.
anyone who heard this, and thank you, Morg and
Thank
Jim,
you, Blue.
for keeping everything going.